Hi, I'm Rasheed Ogunlaru, coach, speaker, and author of Soul Trader, Putting the Heart Back into Your Business, founder of Evolved Heart, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here with Dr. Elizabeth Shaw and founder of A Thousand Black Voices and so many other things. Dr. Elizabeth, I'm so thrilled you're here. I'm trying to remember the first time we met. It might be at the Precious Awards, which celebrates women of color in business and in leadership. I think you might have been winning an award there. And then we met at a conference around health equalities not long ago. And then you kindly invited me to a really fascinating roundtable on artificial intelligence, which really made me myself ask all sorts of questions. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted that you're here as my guest, so we can have a little bit of a conversation, invite people around to have our own roundtable. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you inviting me to have this conversation, really, because there's so much to talk about in the environment and the world that we're operating in at the moment.
Mm, mm,
And, I know really we align on values, we align on, what does compassion look like? What does
mm,
empathy look like? How do we
mm,
bring this into the work that we do? And
mm,
so that was a real connect for us. And I'm hoping that we are going to be sharing some of that with your listeners right now, because
mm.
that is really relevant now in the, like I mentioned, the world that we're operating in.
So well said. And I'm really passionate and through things like Evolve Heart about how is it we can raise our level of consciousness as a species and how can we raise our level of compassion. I wonder if you would just say a little bit for anybody who doesn't know you about some of the strands of work that you do, just so that people can get to know a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, you started by saying that we met at the Precious Awards and we've had subsequent
Mm,
meetings since then. And I
mm,
think it's starting from that particular point of view. I mean, it was an incredible honor to, have an award there around social entrepreneurship. And
mm,
I've got other awards as well around, Trailblazer, and champion for change. And all this leads back to, the work that I'm doing to
mm,
engender change for communities,
mm,
particularly the Black communities, those of Black heritage. And this came about really, this mission came about because of what was going on quite a few years ago now, actually thinking about it, but it just seems like yesterday,
mm,
actually you
mm,
know, um, when everything was really coming about, killing of Black individuals, and all of this was happening in the States, but it reverberated around the whole world,
mm.
and particularly in my household, you know, um, having this viewpoint of, oh my gosh, what's going on? What can I do about it? And this, what can I do about it, came about because I'm seeing my family, my dad, really so affected by it.
And
He,
particularly the George Floyd case that that
yes,
that that brought people's attention to it, and then that conversation, right? Yeah.
yes, so affected by it. He was in the States at the time,
Mm,
and so I had to, I say, have the courage to lift my head above the parapet, you know, and say, well, this is what I'm doing. This is where I'm going to be focusing my attention. And that attention really is how can we make sure that our communities thrive, and our communities thrive through innovation and through access to capital, access to social and financial capital. So, in supporting that, building an inclusive global community, global ecosystem where we have startups, we have operators, individuals that support startups and want
mm,
to engage with startups,
mm,
government that has policies to support our startups and support an entrepreneur ecosystem, support the economy through,
mm,
SMEs and technologists. Um, and so running accelerators, we were so lucky to be featured in Forbes for the work that we do around, we ran an accelerator, first one actually in AI and blockchain. and also to running trade missions. We run trade missions to support
Mm,
our founders, founders that are startups, from really early stage through to Series A,
mm,
sector agnostic. So any sectors, they
mm,
are in many parts of the world, so the UK, Africa, the US, Europe. And so we help them to expand into different regions. So that's what these trade missions are all about, helping them to understand what are the opportunities in different geographical locations and why should they actually then think about landing there. And so we did that work and do that work with the British consulate and other
mhm,
governments around the world, engaging, with operators and investors in those cities to, we'll say, hey, we've got loads of innovative founders who have gone on to Techstars, have gone on to Google Black Founders Fund, who have raised capital and continue to grow, and those that also want to grow organically. And that impact is something that I'm very proud of. And when I say impact, being proud of that impact, it's proud of the impact that these individuals are making,
mm, mm,
that they're making, and
mm,
that those that join our community, mentors, a whole range of individuals, that they are, that they're making themselves. So
mm,
for me, I always say this, throwing a pebble into the sea and you have ripples, but those ripples continue because others are throwing pebbles in and
mm.
they're making such a huge impact. So that is, while I'm gaining these awards, it's really for the community and for what they're doing to ensure that our community thrives. So that is part of what I do
Wow.
around.
Well, that, if I can pause you there, I mean, Elizabeth, that's really vast and in quite, really quite something, isn't it? I'm just, as I hear you say that, so there's an event, and many of us will have had events that
Yeah.
make us reevaluate where we are, where we're in our lives, what we're doing, whether what we're doing is purposeful, and so on. Can I just ask, again, for the purpose of the listener, what was life like prior to that moment? Had you already been involved in the space of enterprise and innovation? Had that, were you already passionate about social change and community and those particular themes? What were things like? Because many people have that moment where something changes and they're suddenly doing this and doing that. What was life like prior to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been about people, actually.
Right.
It's always very important to support individuals in what they want to achieve,
Mm,
and in doing that, really understanding where they're coming from.
mm,
So we all go through lots of various different things during the day, throughout our lives. And what we want is to be able to thrive and
mm,
to be able to operate in environments that take us who we are, bring our
mm,
whole selves to work.
mm,
That's the saying, isn't it? Bring our whole selves to work. But it really is that we are seen and
mm,
we bring in value and
mm.
that value is seen. So that's, engaging in all of that. And obviously, that's something that's gone through everything I do. So yes, I started out in reinsurance. And in reinsurance, it was really how do I reduce the liabilities of large organizations, mainly in the States, to, you know, reduce their liabilities. I worked in the reinsurance for Lloyd's, and there was a lot of transformation going on during that particular time, and being involved in that, and actually
Mm,
also from a technological standpoint and developing systems, um,
mm,
was something that
mm,
was really a learning point for me as well. These were
mm,
early careers, and but
mm,
everything in that was while I'm running my team and department, what is it that you need? How are
mm,
you engaging? I
mm.
would make sure that I understood, what was going on from a personal perspective. And we all have so much going on in our lives. Um,
So that fascinates me because that bit is really interesting that very often in our lives, we are understandably focused on me, what I'm doing, what I'm trying to achieve, and perhaps some of the nearest and dearest. But but for you, there had been from fairly early on, it seems, a sense of, okay, what is this about for others, including the team, and then, you know, leading us to where we are at at now. And I think that's a really important theme, I guess, for this discussion that I'm really fascinated about. How is it that we're able to develop that level of consciousness where there's real care? Because one of the things that strikes me when I've heard you talk in all the conversations, there's something about that you're genuinely interested in the human being, not just what they're doing. That you know that because and that can be in the space, for example, of enterprise and business. It's not always there. It's not always there. We're just so focused on we're doing this, but your starting point is that human being and how they're actually at. And I think it's I guess one of the things that going back to that situation of the George Floyd's murder and other awful events, many of those events and things like COVID, that many of those moments prompted us to remember, hang on, how is somebody else doing? How is my neighbor doing? How is somebody else who looks like me or somebody else who doesn't look like me? What's their experience? What's going on? How can I show up with a greater sense of humanity? I kind of want to kind of almost jump around a little bit. Is that something that you were very, very conscious of when you were founding A Thousand Black Voices, that it wasn't just about finance, capital, and so on, that it was about community, it was about connection? Was that something you were very clear that you wanted to build into that ecosystem from the start?
Yes, because what's so very important is that um, being there for each other and thriving together. So, of course, overriding all of that, three main reasons for building A Thousand Black Voices: for us to understand ourselves,
Mm,
and in understanding ourselves, it's deeply understanding our various different experiences. And that is the only way that we're going to be able to navigate what is seen as difference. But
mm,
we should be celebrating difference. And many
mm,
of us do celebrate difference. Um, but essentially, still, we don't understand each other deeply. So bringing
mm,
community together, individuals together, um,
mm,
that enables that understanding to grow and continue growing.
mm,
The second reason was actually to understand what's happening in different geographical locations, which is why we're
mm,
global. Because
mm,
the reports are not nuanced sufficiently. Reports give factual information, and that's very important. But on the ground insight, on the ground understanding of what is happening and what you're going to experience should you
mm,
arrive in a certain situation or environment, is sometimes very much lacking.
mm,
And of course, this is written and noted from a perspective of this individual from Black heritage.
mm,
Reports are not always nuanced, and things are changing over time. So there's
mm,
the great reports coming out around this, and we always situate our experiences in the Black experience. And when I say Black experience, many different
mm,
experiences that we're bringing, and we're always
mm,
learning.
mm,
And this is the whole point, always learning. So that enables our founders and those that come into our communities
mhm,
to understand, well, how to expand into different locations,
mm,
because you understand the culture, how to do business in these different locations. The third reason, um, really so that we could be our own supply chain,
mm,
so that we have got a community of individuals that operate together, trust each other,
mm,
and you can do business together.
mm,
And
mm,
building that. And
mm,
yes, we live in a capitalist world, which you know we we have to engage in at this point in time, majorly capitalist, let's put that caveat on
mm,
there. And
mm,
so this is another reason of how can we actually make sure that we have some capital flowing through our
mm,
communities, and that
mm,
serves the communities that we're operating.
mm, mm,
So community is core for a number of reasons. Yes, it's about trust, it's about how we engage with each other, it's about how we then navigate the whole process of making sure we thrive together. And that's
mm,
missing in our world. I mean, generally, as we can see what's going on now from
Mm,
uh, a whole range of things,
mm,
uh,
mm,
we need to pride ourselves in understanding that life is precious.
mm,
And with life being precious, relationships are precious. And I say
mm,
relationships because interaction's important. I mean, my
mm,
PhD was, around in interaction and that
mm,
social interaction. And
mm,
yes, through entrepreneurship and through how we manage
mm,
our emotions and through the performance,
mm,
and it's all around
mm.
how what is legitimacy for us? What does that actually mean in the spaces that we operate in? And that all comes back to our social interactions and the trust that we engender.
And that's powerful because I wondered that I mean I'm so glad you mentioned that about that PhD about and about that interrelationship because ultimately that's what I mean Einstein was everything is relational, everything is about is relative, isn't it? Everything is. And it's interesting that when you mention business because I wondered, do you feel as though we live in a world in which unfortunately what happens is that almost every relationship ends up being transactional. And so for me, there's something about how our interaction should be transformational. Sure, there may well be transactional elements to it, as you said. We live in an economy. The nature of the economy and the world that we live in society. There's much of that going on in business and how the workplace, etc. But do you feel that sometimes that there's almost that the transactional nature almost puts that a lid on us genuinely connecting, deeply caring, taking that time to understand ourselves, to understand somebody, to value them, that person beyond the deal, the connection, or what have you. Because I mean, one of the things that I enjoy in the conversations there, the catch ups and so on that we've had, and I've observed you in other spaces where you won't just ask somebody how they're doing. You'll ask two or three more questions because you genuinely care. And I think that sometimes we're thrown when people genuinely do that. So I'm curious about that because for me, I mean, with the work that I do, that relational is key. Somebody's relationship to themselves, their appreciation first of all of themselves, their appreciation. Then you talked about life being precious. The appreciation of life itself. For me, I see it almost as three phases: embracing oneself, embracing life itself, the dance of life that we come and we go, it's impermanent. And then the challenging bit, embracing everyone else as best we can, moment by moment, in all the different spaces that we find ourselves in. Because otherwise, it's just purely transactional. And so what? It's just so what. So I might get the deal, I might get the gig, I might build a great business, I might do this, I might achieve that. But who cares ultimately? Or where's the care in the what it is that one is doing? I'd love to know your thoughts about that. To have a founder, somebody who's founding something that has that at its core for me is really important because we're often thinking about it's interesting, it strikes me, Elizabeth, it's interesting when it comes to business. We often think about, okay, business looking to scale, we're looking about equity in terms of finance, but what about equity in terms of human equity and all of that? So there's all of these things. I wonder, do you have a take that on this about how it is that we actually just show up for each other and meet each other as human beings, given that the PhD was about it and that clearly there have been these moments that have reignited that human side of the work that you do.
Yeah. Well, as you were talking, I was smiling deeply and thinking about it. It reminded me of so many different things. Oh, mind you, you are talking to an investment uh, person with an investment experience as well, being a VC. So there's a juxtaposition going on here. But essentially, we talk about the financial aspect at some point anyway. But
Mm,
yes, we live in a capitalist world, and so there's going to be that transactional aspect to it because we have to survive. And when we're talking about thriving, we're talking about money coming through our communities and coming through and flowing to individuals. Um, and so there's that side of things. But what's important to deliver that is you talked about transformational, the
mm,
engagement. for me, it's always about trust relationships. And
Mm,
trust relationships will bring what it may bring,
mm,
whether that's a capital or some interest, whatever that
mm,
interest looks
mm,
like.
mm,
So let's leave it like that when we talk about interest. But I think, something that drives me, and I have to be reminded sometimes,
mm,
when we're talking about community, is
mm,
is really how I show up for other people as well.
mm, mm,
And so, I sometimes have to have reminders about me, but I think essentially that is you give and others give.
mm,
You give.
mm,
I mean,
mm,
I
mm,
had over the past, you've talked about, watching me engage, but I think that's important. I mean, I had someone sent me a message, dropped a message on my phone that I just listened to today. I said it made my day. Um, question of, well, I've finally left this particular career I was in,
mm,
and I'm delighted. I'm doing my own thing, and
mm,
I'm saying thank you because it's like I asked the question, well, what's stopping you? What's
mm,
stopping you from
mm,
engaging in this endeavor that you want to do? You know,
mm,
we stop ourselves because there's some
mm,
fear associated with that. And
mm,
I acknowledge that myself because I did say initially I had to find the courage to do this.
mm,
So
mm,
there's always that
mm,
element of it, even
mm,
though we know that we can do it. We
mm,
can do it. And I do say to everyone, you can do it. You can always act towards something. And I think I mentioned that during the Ethical AI Initiative
mm,
roundtables that we do as well. We
mm,
have to have some clear action. So it's
mm,
really focusing on asking those clear questions, because I'm also a coach, to
mm,
to have individuals think deeply
mm,
around certain elements of what they need to move forward, and that what they need is really internal to within them,
mm.
but it's also about having people around you that care. So
Right.
it's asking the question. So over the past few weeks, I mean, I've been engaged in, well, always engaged in conversations, and conversations around work and direction and strategy and
Mm,
finance and all the rest of it. But
mm,
for me, it's always either I start the conversation out if I have the opportunity to ask how individuals are, or after the conversation, during the conversation, having having that focus on how are you? And I think,
mm,
it's it's a simple question if you care about individual. People have come through to me and said, "Oh my gosh, no one's ever asked me that before." And I'm like,
mm,
"Oh my gosh, no
mm,
one's ever asked you that before."
mm,
Because
mm,
I'm
mm,
anticipated that people have asked. And then there's the conversation then that opens up around that. And I've
mm,
had that so, and I should say too often, where
mm,
individuals have said they haven't had that before. And I've
mm,
had then individuals being very emotional
mm,
around that fact
mm,
because essentially they're carrying a load,
mm,
and they've found someone that cares.
mm,
Um, and you can show that care whether you know someone or not.
mm.
It's really about people, and then once you have these conversations, it's really then how can you support, because it's
Right.
one thing asking the question, but then it's
Mm,
following on how can you support that individual. So that also goes back, I mean, it's a learning point for me as well, growing through that. It's not, I didn't start out like that. I think I had to grow into empathy. Um,
mm,
but you realize that there's more than a transactional first.
mm,
I'll put it a
mm.
transactional first approach.
Yes, I
We
like
all,
what you're
we all
saying.
need to move towards some transaction, but
Right.
this is a people first approach.
Right, right. Very powerful, very profound. And you touched on a couple of things that in our time and the remaining time, I want to touch on a few things. There was a lovely moment where you really touched on potential and human potential and um, almost giving somebody the space, the permission of who they are, what they want to be, what they want to achieve, what they want to create, and so on. And of course, for many people, business might well be the route through which they express themselves, they contribute to society, and they fulfill some of their potential. I want to talk a little bit about that, particularly, I guess, the purpose. Somebody finding their real the thing that really what they're really about, what they can really truly contribute. I also
Mhm.
want to touch on AI because, and maybe I want to go to the AI bit first because when you kindly invited me to the round table that you ran, and it was lovely because the event that we had been at previously was looking at, you were part of a roundtable within a health summit, which was looking at how AI could be really helping leaders begin to think a little bit about AI, artificial intelligence. And for me, I think artificial intelligence is a fascinating topic because for me, it immediately evokes, well, what is it to be, where my mind goes is what is it to be human, and what is the role of being a human being in this age, in this world that we now find ourselves in. And what I loved about that round table, and it was lovely because I was one person was not an expert by any means, but it was lovely, this very rich conversation that was we were having about leadership and the questions that we all need to be asking ourselves, whether we're a leader in a business, whether it is a leader in the family, in the home, and so on. And then you raised some really powerful points about intelligence, what things where we are with it, and issues around if we're using, and I'm not an expert on this, language models and all of this to build AI and build all sorts of all sorts of wonderful things, but is there equity in that? And is the whole world benefiting from it? And there are so many questions that we need to ask ourselves around that. I just want to ask you a little bit about what was it that drew you into that space? And I was really struck by, I mean, just to say, just in case you don't say it, it was wonderful because you talked about going into all sorts of rooms around the world and having round tables to ask these deep questions, which are there's a technological element of them. There's a business element. There's policy questions around it. There's Schumann, who we are, questions around it. What drew you into that space, and where is it that you hope that we can evolve to at this stage of AI? Because it seems as though in some ways we're playing catch up to what the technology can do. It's almost like we've been sitting back, okay, let's see what it can do. And then maybe we need to then begin to think about how what we do or what the future of work might look like. I know these are very, very big questions, but I'd love to know what drew you into that space and some of the things that what interests you, the things that you think we should all be thinking of, particularly those people who are leaders.
Mm, thank you. Um, First off, getting into that space was really coming out of, again, back to people and trying to understand, well, how do we ensure that what's being built is responsible, safe,
Mm,
non-biased,
mm,
um, technology? And so I have many founders in A Thousand Black Voices, and I started asking the questions um, of investors. Well, how do you ensure that those you invest in your portfolio, how do you ensure that they're developing ethical technology,
mm,
responsible AI,
mm,
that they understand what this is being used for? And at the
mm,
time, the investors were no, they didn't have any governance around it. And it was really, well, we're investing, and these individuals are great people. And I'm like, well, I think we're all great people. We are all great people. However, see what's going on in that sphere and in the world. When you develop some technology is used for something other than what you initially expected it to be used for, or it's
mm,
now grown into something totally different.
mm,
Um, so that's how I got into ethical AI. It was really from asking loads of questions
mm,
and trying to understand, and then thinking about, well, how can I help? And I think that is a place for you to start, anyone to start in trying to understand not just technology, but any arena or area that you're wanting to go into, or
mm,
thinking, how can I help, or what actions do I need to take? It's always about asking loads of questions, and then moving forward from there. I mean, at the end of the
mm,
day, we're still all trying to figure it out. Yeah,
mm,
yeah, well, okay,
mm, mm,
we've got the big boys, and we're friends with many of the big boys, but and I say that because, of course, I'll be highlighting, uh, gender inequality at some point,
mm, mm,
but essentially, um, there are various different scenarios that are being worked towards, but we
mm,
still have, a voice as part of that, to actually think about, well, what does this scenario, what does future work
mm,
look like? What does society
mm,
look like? Or where do we want it to go? We have a voice in that. And
mm,
so, it's great that I'm in spaces where I'm able to share my perspective. My perspective is only one perspective. We
mm,
need all perspectives.
mm,
When I'm convening, it's really, whether it's banks or operators or governments or developers or users,
mm,
need to
mm,
share their voices, and we need to hear and listen to them.
mm,
It's so that it's both sides, but it's
mm,
really that at the end of the day, technology. I don't believe that technology should outpace our ability to understand it and or govern it in some way.
mm,
In that way, I mean guardrails, some guardrails
mm,
around it.
mm,
It is an incredible tool. It is a fantastic tool to be utilized, but is a tool. And I say tool because I was lucky enough to be in the Vatican having conversations around ethical AI.
mm,
And in that, it's really emphasis on it is a tool. So it
mm,
needs to be utilized for humanity's
mm,
benefit.
mm, mm,
And there is so much it can offer
mm.
towards that.
Mm,
Uh,
I like what you're saying there about that. I just wanted to just I loved that segue um, there, how you talked about AI, the ethics, the responsibility, um, and then that segue to it being a tool and for humanity, because I think that's the place that we meet that of that work being really about that the human being, humanity, how we can show up with heightened consciousness and to continue to evolve, but with a greater degree of, this is my my kind of terminology in some of this stuff, but for me with that real heightened consciousness. And I really like the way that you are in spaces where those questions are being had, and also crucially, I love the bit where you talked about many voices in that, so that there can be deeper understanding, deeper thought about, okay, well, what is it that we're doing? How can we, who are we? How can we, um, can I ask, well, let me just say one tail end thing that I really liked that you asked at the round table that I was at. What I got, you asked us all at the end of the day, how is it that what is it you all could do as a result of that? And it really made me think about that thing about, well, what are the conversations that anybody could have anywhere? And I think that some of this came out in that roundtable conversation. Of course, the conversations for people as lead, in their organizations and their businesses, at home with their families and so on, that everybody feels that they can be involved in this kind of conversations. And I think when we were at the event prior to that, the NHS one, you were making the point, and a couple of other people making the point that leaders really need to make sure that they are that tool bit, that they are in the room, that there is a responsibility taken around AI. There's a board responsibility. There's that deep understanding. That's asking really good questions in order that ultimately what we're about there, which is service, or in that case, patient care, is ultimately the thing that is really, really sovereign, and that it can't be just left out of that room. It's got to be something involved in all the decision making that we're making. I want to touch on, just in case of time, the thing about that you mentioned in the lead up there. I think this is the bit where it's interesting, when that term about the big boys and so on. But it's interesting, isn't it? When it comes to business and enterprise and big business and so on, often we see the male entrepreneurs. You know that there are incredible female entrepreneurs, but often and there can be that feeling that it's a very male, space, and that in really in these broad kind of terms, that the femininity, that the energy that we relate to in terms of feminine energy, the compassionate side is often missing, and also just the females who are visible, science, technology, education, maths, and all of this kind of space. Could you tell us a little bit, Dr. Elizabeth, about your take on that? Because it's for me, I think it's incredibly important. It's really important that we all nurture not just the entrepreneurialism, but the compassion, and that there's equity, and that women, and people of all races and so on, and all backgrounds, abilities, disabilities, faiths, preferences, all the rest of it, feel as though that they have a voice and that they have a space. Could you tell us about what your observations have been about that gender equality piece and that visibility piece? Because it's important. It's really important that we right now, isn't it, that we get that balance, we hear those voices. Tell us your take on that and anything you want to share on that.
Yeah, I mean, well, throughout, you're asking the question around investment and, enterprise. This is a challenge throughout various different sectors that um, women either earn less than their male counterparts. It happens in finance, it's quite a bit, or there's different perceptions that are around women in as leadership.
Mm,
Look at our FTSE 100 and how many women are CEOs of FTSE 100. Very few.
mm,
So this is pervasive, really, across
mm,
industries and across various different functions.
mm,
You mentioned the NHS. That is, looking at that as well when you're looking at women across in senior leadership, or looking at women, across, where they're situated. The
mm,
challenge is, you know, having those individuals all the way through various different layers. So,
mm.
if I just then focus on founders and VC, we need more women in
Venture
VC.
capital, yeah, for
Yeah,
those people,
into
yeah,
venture capital. Yeah, we
yeah.
need more women in venture capital, which enables more women to be funded. The
Mm,
percentage of women being funded is just quite a few. I actually
mm,
have to double check on the figures on
mm,
that
mm,
at the moment. Because when it comes to women in VC, I think it's maybe about 4.5% or something like that. But I don't quote me, I have to check. But still, it's very much like I've been part of Ada Ventures, and looking at that, they are very much a focus on an inclusive
mm,
culture of
mm,
engagement
mm,
across genders, across various different groups, against the ethnicities. So you want to engage in that particular way, and you want to have policies that enable you to make sure that you're not looking at pipelines that are really male dominated. When I
mm,
say pipelines, looking at deals, looking at where you're investing. Because
mm,
if you're thinking about using technology to support you, or to think about what has happened in the past, it's very much pattern matching.
mm,
If you haven't done something in the past, then you're
mm,
relating to that, back to that all the time, to look at what the deals have done, how well
mm,
they've done, what money you've made from that, what's been your return on investment. Then you're going to go, what has been? And we're trying to
mm,
break that. We're trying to say, well,
mm,
actually, you know, diversity is to be celebrated, and diversity and diverse teams make much more money.
mm,
I think it's 30% more return on investment where you have diverse teams. And so that needs to be considered throughout. And so
mm,
we've got to break, like I mentioned, break that. So
mm,
at the end of the day, we have to challenge investors in their the operations, and
mm,
where they're looking for deals,
mm,
how they're assessing deals, and look beyond, I think, past performance data to
Mm,
enable that to happen. But the challenge still is a female founder may get access to some capital, might, a first round.
mm,
Um, we're finding, of course, then second round is really difficult to get investment. For Black female founders, it's so challenging that eventually they're closing their business,
mm,
or they're looking. There's data out there to show that Black founders then are funding themselves,
mm,
to get
mm,
forward. And
mm,
in funding yourself, it's great your business is going, but then there's a high percentage of one person or
mm,
two people,
mm,
SMEs or micro businesses. Um, there's a focus on businesses that don't require a lot of capital to start. And
mm,
essentially, then you've got this sort of skew where you're not necessarily looking at technology businesses where there's the possibility for scale
mm,
for women, and that's something that needs to change. So there's now, a lot of activity around female-focused funds, having females and women into VC. So there's a drive
mm,
for that, but
mm.
there's still a long way to go.
Yeah,
It's still such a long way to go. I think for gender equality, when it comes to the amount of money, I can't remember, another 34 years or something like that. Um,
right.
you know,
Right. And
to
that's frightening. And I guess the thing I want to link that back to, and I guess it's a similar story with the thing we were talking about before with the AI work and the artificial intelligence, what's going on there, the equity there. Are we one of the things that strikes me from this conversation is, and I think it was one of the things that came out from the round table,
yeah,
is that it's we're not going to see the best results for humanity if we're not hearing all of those different
yeah,
voices,
voices.
if we're not considering those factors. We know about the health inequality issues, about about women's health, and then when you add race and etc., ethnicity in there, and I know that you highlighted that concern around AI. I wonder if you wanted to say a quick word about that bit before we begin to wrap up, because I guess that's going to be a really prevalent issue for us if we're not mindful about where we are with AI and globally, and if we're just looking at for a very narrow American or European lens. I wonder if there's anything that you would say, I guess, whilst we're here and that we've got people listening to us, what would be your anything you want to say there around about on that on the AI side and leadership, and any tail end thing you want to say on that business thing about leadership for anyone who's listening, the kind of questions that they should be asking themselves, whether they're a leader, whether they're in entrepreneurship, whether it is that they're a funder, whether it is that they're involved in policy or influencing or in those circles with those people. Any questions that you want to, or thoughts that you want to put on the table for people to consider?
Yeah, I mean, if we just really have to highlight, if you're running a business, as a director or a trustee, your overriding concern is to ensure that that business is sustainable, survives, is profitable, does it grows beyond your time there. And so that is going back to the question you talked about, transactional.
Mm,
Um, that is what you're focusing on. And what does that then mean, or what does that look
mm,
like if
mm,
you're saying that being, presenting ethical solutions is going to cost much more money over something else? What are you going to do? Are you going to
mm,
choose the non-ethical? Okay, let's not say non-ethical, then I'll leave that one out. But um, focusing on where are you going to put your money.
mm,
So there are questions around that because you are legally bound to ensure that you make your stakeholders, shareholders,
mm,
money.
mm,
Okay. So there is that question mark there.
mm,
But is it mutually exclusive? Is it really? Is that the question? Is it, oh, okay, so that's going to cost me a little bit more money, and so I'm not going to utilize that because my role is to make sure we make as much money as possible and give that back to our shareholders. That is a question of values.
yeah.
It's a question of culture.
Yeah.
It's a question of what we talked about earlier around compassion and
Yeah.
empathy, and how we, as as individuals and leaders in our organizations, we are the ambassadors of society. We are the ambassadors of what we of holding society in the palm of our hand to support society and support growth and support the generations, the future generations. And that,
Spot on. And as you were saying that, Dr. Elizabeth, the one thing that jumped out to me was that also, what are our KPIs, our key performance indicators? Sure, the shareholders' turn, sure, the sustainability, but what about the cost? What about the human cost if we don't? Are we measuring that? What is the cost to society, the people we fail, the people whose homes aren't made of the best quality material, the people who we hadn't really perhaps done deeper testing of the particular product, and if we had, we'd realize that it may not have been adjusted enough for people of this background or for people with this disability or what have you. If we're looking at just purely what we can gain rather than also that element of cost and deep equity. So I love these questions that you're posing that we need to really ask, and we know they're not easy questions, but what I really like is that these are real deep questions that we need to ask ourselves. So what I'm hearing is that, and you said it earlier on, one thing we've got to not do is just simply look at what has been before. What's been that track record before? What have we just invested in before? We need to ask ourselves deep other questions. And the question I like asking, who's not in the room? And it makes me think of also a saying of mine, from the head alone, transformational leadership is almost impossible. But from the heart, it's inevitable. And what I like, and why I'm so glad that you agreed to us having this conversation here,
oh,
is just nudging that bit of our real deep humanity, nudging that heart, that heartfulness, so that we can really truly serve, that we can truly be of service to one another.
yeah.
And with that, it strikes me that then there's great hope. I just wonder if I just want to, as we begin to kind of wrap up, and I hope that this conversation just sparks many other conversations. Could you tell me a little bit about how would you know when you feel you've done a good job? There was this mission, the mission, I guess the mission I guess became turbocharged at the events that you talked about earlier on in this call. But when would you say that you feel you've achieved that? For me, when I've heard some of the rooms that you've been having conversations and being involved in conversations and nudging these things, that's a huge contribution. But for you, how will you feel when you have made an impact or when you've achieved whatever the mission is? Because again, that's another thing, isn't it? Right? That we've got to kind of give ourselves credit for what we've already achieved and all of that stuff. But also, when would you know that, you know what? Yeah, the mission's kind of being achieved. Would any take on that?
Gosh, is there an end point that we
May
have
not
to
be an
get
end
to?
point, but yeah, there's certainly not an end point. But it's a
Yeah,
moment where you at least feel, you know what? Um, yeah, not a bad, that's not bad. I've kind of done,
yeah,
because I
yeah,
think that's the thing for us all too, isn't it? Because I think I mean, just on that, as a segue to that, I think I want to take a moment to really applaud all those incredible people. And exactly. It's like those incredible people who, without fanfare, and it links back to where we met the Precious Awards, without fanfare, are doing incredible things as carers, as friends, as neighbors, as mothers, as daughters, as brothers, sisters, friends, uncles, aunties, as employees, as people who are running a community group, as people who are just doing an incredible job behind that counter in wherever it is they are, these incredible people, which interestingly, COVID was one of the few moments where we really recognized and saw so many of those people that we otherwise just walk
yeah.
past and their
Mhm.
rich kind of contributions. So I think there's something about that and acknowledging all those people who without fanfare are just doing incredible things and may never have businesses that may never scale. They might just be somebody who's just doing whatever it is that they're doing. So there's something about
Yeah.
that. But in terms of with this particular mission, is there a moment, and has there already been a moment where you're like, Oh, that was really powerful. That was really on purpose. Anything you want to say about that?
Well, I mean, it's always incredible, and I think I gave you some examples. Always incredible when individuals feel that you've helped them,
Mm,
that you've
mm,
given them some insight, some a flash of inspiration of,
mm,
yeah, those are actually my key moments,
I'm with you.
where that's happened, and for me, it's about, well, how do I have meaningful engagements and how
Mm,
can I bring value? Because I always
mm,
say actually that if I'm not able to bring value, then I shouldn't be in that space because
yeah.
there's someone you just said thank you to, incredible individuals. There, it's so many incredible individuals out there that
Mm,
can do and bring value. And so
mm,
there is that,
mm,
and in saying that, there's so many that don't have the visibility that they deserve.
mm,
So the question there is, how do we support individuals, great individuals, to have that visibility? And I'm lucky enough to have some visibility, and there are others that have more visibility. And we're all, building the work that we do on these wonderful individuals that are around us.
mm,
So the question is, how do we bring that fantastic engagement that people have, impact that they're making out to the open? And so, when you say, how do you know when you've done a great job?
mm,
Um, it's from these individuals, but it's also there's so much work to be done. So it's never
mm,
going to be done because really
mm,
overarching all of this is, how do we make sure that we have communities that are always working together, see each other, there's no racism at all, and all of this. And is this going to happen in my lifetime? No. So I have a lot of work to do. I
mm,
don't think that,
mm,
that's not ever
mm,
ever
mm,
going to end. And with a focus around technology now and how rapidly it's going, this there's continuous learning, and for me,
mm,
that's exciting, that there's
mm,
always this learning to be had, that there's so much opportunity in the various different technologies that are out there, in
mm,
how we're transforming our lives. There's
mm,
also the challenge of, what do I need to learn to then support and make sure that this is for humanity, and what does human being what does humanity mean? What does it mean to be human? You mentioned that, and that's
mm,
something I learned
mm.
through, the Vatican meetings that we, have been part of, which has been
Mm.
fantastic. So I think in all of this, and I think, talking about technology, it's without these tools, technology, our engagements, without having deep care, deep empathy,
Mm,
um, deep interactions, then there's liability. That
mm,
leadership that we have or feel we have is a liability because we don't have uh,
mm,
that deep care, that deep compassion, the empathy, and not necessarily using tools to support that.
mm,
Um, and I want to make sure that, by bringing people together to have these conversations and to act, because that for me it's always about action. There has to be
mm.
action. There has to be clear
Yes,
outcome.
coaches, there needs to be action, right? Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not saying KPIs. I'm not.
no, no.
We'll talk about KPIs if we're talking about VC and finance, and you know. But in all of this, yes, there are going to be some KPIs out there. How you want to frame action, but I need action that we take charge of,
Mm,
that
mm,
we are responsible for. We don't
mm,
need, you know, um, a regulation to tell us that we need to have action for ourselves and how we move forward. We need guidance and regulation to
mm,
to support us in
mm,
how
mm,
we're engaging, but essentially we should start from ourselves to then ensure that we are not being a liability on the society and stakeholders we're operating with, and we're actually enabling these communities to thrive. So I think I've talked about a few things there, about back to
yeah.
actions, back to empathy, leadership, and what kind of leadership we should have. For me, it's trust relationships and trust
Mm,
leadership, um, and ensuring that I'm supporting and not being a liability, but bringing value to those spaces I'm in, and also there to support others with their visibility, with their
mm,
growth.
mm,
Um, and ensuring that individuals can do that, because of course we have a lot of self-talk that is like, you said, how do you know? And I'm like, self-talk, self-talk. So a lot of self-talk going on there. But so helping others, and
mm,
it's just going for it, going
mm,
for what you
yeah,
believe is right,
mm,
sense checking, with people around you, and
mm,
asking questions. I mentioned asking questions
mm,
in our conversation, and just having the courage to move forward. So
mm,
I'm going to continue having self-talk around courage, having
mm,
self-talk around I can act, I can make a change,
mm,
having self-talk around, the fact that impact is made through others, and making sure that I'm able to support others to make an impact,
mm,
um, in whatever guise that looks like, and also having courage to stand back and say, "Well, I'm not bringing value. There's so many other
mm,
people, and I want to learn."
mm,
So there's
mm,
so much exciting stuff going on. A lot of
mm,
things that we're fearful of,
mm,
I'm talking to many people, and risk profiles are very, high in some places, and kind of sometimes a bit rigid, because
mm,
if you've been burnt, sometimes you stand
mm,
back. So
mm,
it's about being open in
mm,
conversations to highlight, what are the opportunities that are available,
mm,
and what are the challenges, and how we're going to get around the challenges. And in
mm,
doing that, that applies to any kind of function we're operating in, any sphere, sector that we're operating. We always have to ask ourselves the questions: is this adding value
mm,
to humanity? Is
mm,
this adding value to our communities? Is this adding
mm,
value to ourselves? True, because we're
mm,
always here learning.
mm,
And so it's about being a dynamic individual in that particular sense. There's just so much to learn, and it's being open to doing that. And sometimes
mm.
that's a challenge, to being open to change.
Yeah,
It's scary.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you in this conversation for bringing a sense of real hope and optimism, but with a grounded realism and with some real practical pointers of things that we can ask in order to challenge. Because as you were speaking, what I got a sense of was the beauty and the growth that can come from rich, genuine, authentic challenge that helps us to truly be responsible, make good decisions, make good investments, make good contributions, ensure that many voices are being heard. So, Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, I want to say a big thank you for coming along and speaking to me. Thank you so much for the incredible work you do through 1,000 Black Voices. And thanks for sharing your just wonderful, rich insights. And I'm really looking forward to other people being able to now enjoy this conversation. And I hope it just sparks them having many, many, many conversations and hearing many, many diverse voices to help them in their lives, in their businesses, in their organizations, and so on in their community. So a very, very, very big thank you from me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I am looking forward to all the conversations that I can have from this, and the impact that everyone's going to make from this, I'm hoping. Thank you.
So